Crucial midterm elections in the United States now less than 2 weeks away, and in an assault on Nancy Pelosi's husband. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Candidates across America are heading into the final days of a political battle that will determine who controls the U.S. House and Senate. But the big political story on this Friday was an attack on the husband of U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Police say 82-year-old Paul Pelosi was violently assaulted at the couple's home in San Francisco in the early morning hours. The assailant allegedly struck Pelosi with a hammer. Police and the FBI are investigating the motive behind that attack. There's much to discuss, so let's get right to our panel. Joining me now here in Washington, D.C. is Eleanor Clift. She's a political columnist with the Daily Beast. With us, too, from Florida is Eric Bolling. He's the host of The Balance on Newsmax TV. Also joining the discussion in Washington is Douglas Sloan. He's the principal and senior political analyst at National Capital Strategy Group. And from Virginia, we're joined by Rina Shah. She's a political analyst and current affairs commentator. I want to welcome all of you to the show. Eleanor, why don't I start with you? I want to get your thoughts on Paul Pelosi's attack. Apparently, the assailant said, where's Nancy as he came in? And this comes, as you know, really, literally days before the election.
Well, first of all, it does sound like he's going to make a good recovery, but he does have a skull fracture, which is not an easy injury to get over. No, it's a terrible attack, and it's probably not surprising that this intruder was yelling, "Where's Nancy?" He apparently wanted to tie up her husband until she got home. The specter of January 6th hangs over these elections. And Nancy Pelosi was the person that the insurrectionists were hunting when they invaded the Capitol. And the imagery from that event and the footage that we have of Speaker Pelosi talking with Vice President Pence, who also was a target with the insurrectionists chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And she was concerned about his health and his safety and worried about him. And the two of them wanted the accounting, the official certification of the election to go forward. They both had their eye on the prize, and that was saving the Republicans, saving democracy. So I want to point out that this is not an isolated incident, what has happened at the Pelosi home. This is the same week where some men have been convicted of trying to murder the governor of Michigan. The election office of Katie Hobbs, who's running for governor in Arizona, was broken into, and the trial of 5 Proud Boys. One just got a conviction of 7.5 years for dragging a police officer into the mob and watching him get pummeled. So we are approaching the election. It's only days away, really. And I think a lot of people in public life are scared. The election workers who are charged with monitoring the election sites, they're being harassed, and they fear for their safety and their lives. This is a terrible time in our country, and it is all the product of a president who refused to accept that he lost an election and has perpetrated a big lie where many millions of people in this country believe that he somehow had the rightful second presidential term taken from him. And he has sent signals, we remember them from the debates, stand by or stand back. He's given signals basically that people in this country who believe the big lie take as permission to participate in political violence. So it's a very dangerous time.
Eric, let me ask you about this, because political threats have been on the rise, and obviously it reflects the deep divisions within this country. She already talked about the Whitmer case. The sentencing will come in December. There was also a court appearance, and it's worth noting, just to be fair, this week, a man accused of attempting to murder the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. So talk to us about what you think is behind this climate of violence. And is the genie out of the bottle, or can we put it back in? Is there a way that the United States can get back to civility where we don't have to worry about these kind of threats?
We would hope so. First of all, we would all on all sides condemn violence against any persons and violence against political figures. It's not acceptable anywhere. All due respect to someone who I grew up watching and loving her journalistic credibility, Eleanor Clift, when she was on various Sunday shows, to go through a laundry list of Democrats that had violence perpetrated upon them, while forgetting some of more recent, Lee Zeldin being attacked with a knife. Lee Zeldin's family, daughters in their house, when gunshots rang out and hit the literally 30 feet from where his daughters were. Lee Zeldin is giving Kathy Hochul a run for her money in the New York governor's race. You hear Rand Paul being attacked by a neighbor. As you point out, the Supreme Court justice, the guy came to kill Brett Kavanaugh, He said it, stated. So none of it is okay. It's not okay when it happens to Democrats or Pelosi at all. And it's not okay when it happens to Republicans. But the problem here is the media, the United States media. Eleanor Clift, a wonderful journalist, has gone rogue. She's become a leftist mouthpiece for it's them, it's not us. It's bad. There's a bifurcation of what's going on in the country. The left hates the right hates the left. Crime is rampant. I've noticed, I didn't hear from Eleanor, that crime in her city, in Pelosi's city, in San Francisco, is off the charts. Homelessness, drug abuse, death from fentanyl. Crime rates are soaring, and this is 2 years under Joe Biden. I didn't hear a word of that.
Eleanor, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then we got to move on.
I'm happy to add some of the political figures he wants to add to the list, but I maintain my main thesis, and that this is a product of the big lie and continuing undercutting of elections safety in this country. The 2020 election was the safest and fairest election in recorded history, and the former president and his allies have turned it into a stain on.
You forget Lee Zeldin's attacker. You forget Rand Paul's attacker. You forget Brett Kavanaugh's attacker.
I don't think that was.
No, he already, I have to interrupt because we got to move on. But she did acknowledge that in her response. Rina, let me bring you into the conversation. You worked on Capitol Hill from 2008 to 2011. We're seeing threats against politicians. Axios saying that the threats against lawmakers jumping 144%. From 2019 or 2017 to 2021. We're also seeing these poll watchers in Arizona who have weapons, and people feel as though they're being intimidated as they go to vote. Tease this out for me. I mean, you worked on the Hill. What does this do to people who work on the Hill? What does it do in terms of discouraging people to run for office, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat? And what about voters?
Well, I myself ran for office in 2016. I ran to be a delegate at the Republican National Convention, and it was a democratically held election. It was something in which the voters of the District of Columbia decided to award me a spot as a full-fledged delegate. I campaigned for myself, and I won a spot. And after that, I decided to criticize the 45th President of the United States. I did so before he was the presumptive nominee for the Republican nomination that summer. And when I did so on Fox News, the extreme far right came after me. I'm talking Breitbart News. There was misinformation printed about me. I cannot tell you what it was like to weather that storm for me the many months that followed, simply because I exercised my First Amendment right. I thought I could go on a national media outlet here in the United States and freely speak my mind without being criticized. The notes I got, people found my home address, they found my phone number, there were incessant voicemails and texts telling me to go back to my country. I'm born on U.S. soil in West Virginia. I am as American as apple pie. People were telling me I'm a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim. People were coming at me with the most egregious comments, aggressive in a nature that I had never imagined, and all simply because they disagreed with my viewpoints. violence. Now, I look around and I think this is a beautiful country that my parents immigrated to in the 70s and 80s. And I was always taught that this is a place where you can freely exercise your opinions without being persecuted, whether it's by the government or your fellow citizens. We've come a long way from that, and particularly for women. Now, I'm the mother of 3 daughters, so I'm really concerned about the climate for women in this country. There is a cost to being a woman in power in this country. There is a gender bias when we see political violence. There's been an uptick in that directed at women, political violence directed at women in the United States. We've seen an uptick in the past decade. I tell you, there are not many women on Capitol Hill anymore who aspire to be public servants when the vitriol that is hurled at them for speaking freely and openly. Now, I'll say this. Today's attack against the husband of the Speaker of the House doesn't surprise me. I'm one of the people that said that it was going to be worse before it got better in the aftermath of January 6, 2021. Fellow Americans have been radicalized, and today's attack shows exactly what the perfect storm of media and the way they frame things, the way they get people hyped up, our mainstream media, that coupled with, again, sexism and racist views held by many fellow Americans. When you combine these things, we're going to see more acts of violence like this, and it saddens me. It should not be this way, and it should be denounced by our leaders in the highest positions across the political spectrum.
Douglas, let me ask you about that. And I, just to her point, I was doing some research today. Ayanna Pressley, a member of Congress from Massachusetts, spent $63,000 on private security last year because of threats. There are lawmakers up on Capitol Hill who are just pleading with the Capitol Police, give us some protection. And they don't have protection details. The Speaker does, but a lot of lawmakers don't. Give us an idea of just the chill in the air as a result of these sorts of things.
Well, after January 6th, I'd say the gloves came off. We saw what a lot of the end result of some of the vitriol on some of these far right-wing news media, or rather media outlets, was happening, or what the end result was. So just regarding all the violence that we saw that day, and now to see Nancy Pelosi's husband get attacked in their home, brutally attacked with a hammer, that is just beyond the pale. So yeah, there is a chill in the air. Yes, we do need to focus on changing how we do things. Elected officials need to be wary of how they're moving, where they're going in public, having extra security at your house, having extra security details. Times have changed in America, and to Rina's point, of every elected official in all leadership coming out strongly against this type of violence, it is critical. And I will say that's something that we did not see under Trump. We saw stand back and stand by. So there is a very marked difference there. And then you still have some Republicans that, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, that are not coming out strongly against some of these violent attacks, whereas every single Democrat is coming out against this type of violence. And like I said, things have changed. The gloves came off on January 6th, and unfortunately, these are new dark times that we are living in as American citizens.
What about the security concerns in this climate, do you think, for like the Secret Service? We've got the president and vice president in Pennsylvania. You've got the former President Barack Obama also making campaign stops. I imagine that has to go into the equation for them, and there has to be genuine concerns.
Right. Well, Barack Obama still has Secret Service protection, of course. Vice President Harris, of course, Joe Biden. They're going to all have very strong, very thorough Secret Service and security details protecting them. Perhaps some of the other leaders in our party, maybe Eric Swalwell is not going to have Secret Service. Maybe Cory Booker is not going to have Secret Service. So they do need to be on the lookout and wary. The game has changed. We're seeing violent attacks on our political leaders. And like I said, we're in new dark times, and we have to change with them. We have to change with the times, and we do need to really think about getting security.
Eric?
Speaking of the game changing, I would like to bring up a point.
Sure.
And look, I was supportive of many of the Trump administration's policies. Did I vote for the former president? I did not. But I criticized President Biden as well. I'm really independent. But let me say this. I thought it was a bad move for former President Trump to appoint somebody from the Secret Service to serve on his own staff. I think that draws into question, as a conservative, I've always been skeptical of big government. I don't like it. I'm always questioning. And I tell you, I don't think it was a good move to bring somebody from the Secret Service into the executive office of the president. That was a very bad move, and it makes me question where the loyalty of a lot of these men and women that serve in the Secret Service. What would they do if there was a bullet coming for somebody that they disagreed with, but it's their job to protect? I'm just putting that out there.
Something to think about. Eric, let's talk about some of these races, because when we booked everybody, we did not anticipate what was going to happen today. But we do want to get to some of these races. One of them, of course, a critical race in Pennsylvania. Senate race debate this week. The lieutenant governor came right out and talked about an issue that was very apparent. He had a stroke recently, and he discussed it. He called it the elephant in the room. Let's listen to what he had to say.
And let's also talk about the elephant in the room. I had a stroke. He's never let me forget that. And I might miss some words during this debate, mush two words together, but it knocked me down, but I'm going to keep coming back up.
Eric, there are a lot of people who are saying, oh, maybe he shouldn't have done this. In fact, I heard a Democratic strategist say that if he'd been on the staff, he would have advised against it. I want to get your thoughts on this.
So, I think the knee-jerk reaction on the right has been wrong, saying that he doesn't deserve a chance to be a senator because he mixes up his words. I don't have that opinion. I have a far more elevated concern about John Fetterman. It's that I'm not sure where he is on certain issues. Fracking, for one, where in that debate himself, he said, I'm for fracking, I'm against fracking, but I'm for fracking. Now, he got confused, but if you go back, you can see him deny being pro-fracking and then also admit being pro-fracking in the last 2 years alone. Then he walks on the stage and says, hello, good night. Look, I'm not making a judgment on whether or not he's going to recover from the stroke. I'm saying I'm not sure where he is on very important issues, especially with what's going on with inflation and fuel prices in the country. I just think it's time. I think what he did is he exposed his flip-flopping and made people go back and go, where is he on fracking? He also has this issue about saying he'd like to release a third of the prisoners who are in jail, and some of them for violent crimes. And then he says he didn't, but he did. So this flip-flopping is not going to help him. I think what that debate did do is not take him out of the game because of what his words were coming out of his mouth on that night. I think what it did was made people look back and go, where is he on this? And you do see a man who's been all over the board on some very important issues.
Eleanor, it's interesting, Eric's talking about the issues, but it seemed like the media coverage on this was more about his stroke and how it hampered his performance. But I did hear the flip side of this, where some people were saying, it was very courageous of him to get out there and talk, despite the fact that he's still recovering from this stroke. Especially when you look back at the history in this country where you have a president like Franklin Delano Roosevelt who tried to hide his infirmaries. I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I don't think the race is going to be decided on flip-flopping on fracking, because fracking is a huge issue in Pennsylvania. No politician can survive if they're not for it. Both Oz and Fetterman were against it in the past and have changed their position. So I think that's a wash. No, I think everybody was watching to see whether Fetterman could handle the debate. Now, I viewed it as kind of pass-fail. I think he passed, not with an A, maybe with a 67. But a lot of people know, they know members of their family, they know people who have had strokes, and they do believe that there's not a deficit of understanding. It's a difficulty with the processing of words, which is going to get better. So Chuck Schumer,
fail, but what about win or lose? Did Fetterman win or lose?
The Democratic leader was caught on a hot mic, apparently on the tarmac, talking to President Biden, saying the debate didn't hurt us that much. And so I don't think that's going to be decisive. But all of these races, they're all tight. They're all kind of jump balls. I think Fetterman has led in every single poll in Pennsylvania, so I think he's going to get across the finish line. So I don't think the debate makes that much different one way or the other.
Rina, let me ask you about his opponent, Dr. Oz, a TV personality. He was asked about the abortion issue. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Should abortion be banned in America? 60 seconds.
There should not be involvement from the federal government in how states decide their abortion decisions. As a physician, I've been in the room when there's some difficult conversations happening. I don't want the federal government involved with that at all. I want women, doctors, local political leaders, letting the democracy that's always allowed our nation to thrive to put the best ideas forward so states can decide for themselves.
Rina, the Philadelphia Inquirer had this headline following the debate performance: Democrats will swing at Oz with an abortion ad during the World Series. Did that response hurt him?
Most American women should swing at Dr. Oz for that response. You know, just a couple of decades ago, well, shoot, only a decade ago, Dr. Oz couldn't have run as a Republican with that response, because I'll tell you this, when I was serving as a senior aide to a Republican member of Congress who was against abortion, and look, my personal values were aside at that point, I can tell you our thing was, when the Affordable Care Act was passing, is that there should be no bureaucrat, there should be no government bureaucrat, no local politician in an exam room between a doctor and a woman, or any patient for that matter. So that response to me just makes my blood boil. I come from a value system, my family, we're anti-abortion for ourselves. I'm pro-choice for other women, because to me, being a Republican means you're for freedom, and that means you're for the freedom of any other American citizen to do what they need to do with their body. And that sometimes could include terminating a pregnancy for various reasons, not simply because it was unintended. Dr. Oz should not be running. He is a joke of a candidate. The guy still has a Turkish citizenship, as far as I understand. And I understand Americans can be dual citizens. I just don't like it. I don't want a U.S. senator who has a citizenship to another country. He has no experience in policy making. He clearly wants to enrich himself because this is his next act. He's already been Oprah's TV doctor. He's already been through the whole reality TV gamut. Why not become a policymaker? Because it's akin to being a celebrity anyway. And guess what? There's still no ban on insider trading for U.S. members of Congress. So why not go into the highest chamber in the land and learn some things to help yourself out? That's what I think Dr. Oz is doing, and I can't wait to watch him lose. I think he's an awful candidate for the Republicans. Just awful.
Douglas, let's talk a little bit more about the abortion issue, because after the Supreme Court ruling reversing Roe, we saw what happened in Kansas, the remarkable red state. People came out in droves, probably the high, in fact, it was in terms of primary, it was the highest in that state in terms of numbers coming out, over 900,000. And this was a constitutional amendment that would have allowed lawmakers to end abortion protections there. And the vote was pretty decisive. And people kind of thought this was going to be a big issue. Is it still an issue out there? I know the economy seems to be percolating. Do you think it's going to play much of a role in the election?
I do, and let me say this before I answer your question. Rina is the type of Republican that we Democrats miss. You know, the type of Republican that you can engage in rational, constructive dialogue with. And sometimes you're going to disagree, but ultimately you'll be able to come to a consensus and move forward with legislation that's in the best interest of the American people. So we really miss Republicans like Rina on the other side of the aisle. That said, absolutely. The Dobbs decision is incredibly controversial. And just in the state of Georgia, we are seeing some of the highest early voter turnout numbers that we've ever seen. A 55% increase in voter turnout from this period in 2020. 1.6 million new voters. And early voter turnout, that favors Democrats. Democrats have the practice of coming out and voting early. So those in all likelihood are Democrats coming out to vote in Georgia. So Dobbs has proven to be an incredible boon for Democrats and for women. They're coming out in groves and in droves to vote for Democratic candidates that are in favor of a woman's right to choose, that believe that the decision on a woman's body should be between that woman and her doctor alone. And it has been a big boon for Democrats in a lot of these swing states and a lot of these senatorial races where it has been competitive, and the Democrats are moving forward. So yeah, Dobbs has been big.
Eric, he mentioned Georgia. Another abortion story surfaced again this week about Herschel Walker, the Heisman Trophy winner and Republican candidate for the Senate. Is that going to hurt him in this campaign?
I think it is. And can I just address also Rina as well? Rina, just embrace it. You're not a conservative. You're not a Republican.
You don't know what I am, Eric. Don't label me. Come on now. You know better than that.
It's a big tent party, Eric. It's a big tent party.
Come on. No personal
The reality is I'm a libertarian. I don't claim to be conservative. I'm pro-choice. Go stick with me on, have them do whatever you want. Just fiscally be conservative, and that's what I am. That sounds like what you're trying to get at, but this whole idea
I'm
that
also independent. I'm also independent. There's a lot of us out there, by the way. We vote Republican sometimes, we vote Democrat sometimes. That's the era.
All right. I just heard you saying you're a Republican and a conservative in this 27 minutes or so, and I just haven't heard any of that. The reality is what you are as a libertarian.
Don't label me, Eric. Don't do that. Come on. We know better than to do that. Let's talk about the issue.
The same party.
Let's talk about the issue. No labels, Eric. No labels.
The same party of social liberalism and also fiscal conservatism. That's
all right.
where
Eric, I apologize, but the question was about Walker. What's this going to do in this
campaign? It will hurt him. It will hurt him. I don't think Herschel can win that race because of what has bubbled up. And also, I think the abortion debate was a bad idea for Republicans to jump on board and to push forward and make a big deal. I will say, I think Stacey Abrams will still lose soundly in that race. And given the number of early voting numbers, will she admit she lost this time? Good
all right, Eleanor, we're just about out of time. We've got 90 seconds or so. There's been a lot of hay made about these polls. It tends to show lately that Republicans have the edge. But, I mentioned that Kansas race, the August polls before the vote seemed to say that amendment was going to win. Of course, in 2016, it looked like Hillary was going to win if you watch the polls. Can we believe the polls this time around, or should we just ignore them?
I don't think we ignore them, because once you start reading the polls, you can't stop. It's addictive. But races that are where the candidates are within 1 or 2 percentage points of each other really can flip one way or the other. And I think, Democrats have watched the momentum they had earlier slip away, and I think they are nervous. And, if you lose 1 or 2, sometimes the other races fall like dominoes, and that would be bad. But I think the Democrats know they can't rely wholly on the abortion issue, and you now have the president and other Democrats coming out and pointing out what it would be like if the Republicans gained power. And they're already talking about holding the country hostage, the economy hostage. So.
And Eleanor, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. I do want to thank all 4 of you for joining us, though. It's been a great discussion. And thank you for joining us for another edition of The Heat. Have a great weekend.